Look down at your hand for a second. Whatever you are, wherever your family comes from, there's a real chance that a small piece of what you're looking at did not come from your species. It came from a different kind of human, one with a heavier brow and a broader chest, who buried their dead, lit fires, and then vanished from the earth around 40,000 years ago. They are extinct. Every last one of them is gone. And yet, in a strange and completely literal sense, some of them are still here, inside you. This is the story of how we found that out, and it begins with a single sliver of bone, smaller than the tip of your finger. For most of your life, you've been told a simple fact, that you are Homo sapiens. Modern human, the one kind of human left standing, and that's true, mostly. But if your ancestors came from anywhere outside of Africa, then roughly 1 to 2% of your DNA was not written by your species at all. It was inherited from another one entirely, a species that has been dead for 400 centuries. You are not, strictly speaking, 100% human. Almost nobody alive is, and the reason why is one of the most quietly astonishing discoveries science has ever made. To understand it, you have to go back more than 60,000 years, to the moment our ancestors began leaving Africa in earnest. Here's the part the old story got wrong. The world they walked into was not empty, it was already occupied by other humans. In the West, across Europe and the Middle East, lived the Neanderthals, shorter, stronger, cold-adapted, with brains as large as ours. Far to the east lived another group entirely, whom we'll come back to, because for a long time nobody even knew they existed. These weren't our ancestors. They were something more like our cousins, a separate branch of humanity that had split from our line perhaps 500,000 years earlier. And forget the knuckle-dragging brute of old cartoons. These were people. They made tools, controlled fire, buried their dead, and cared for their injured, with brains every bit as large as ours. So when our ancestors met them, they did the most human thing imaginable. They had children together. For a long time, no one could say exactly when this mixing took place. The estimates drifted across tens of thousands of years. But in 2024, 2 teams reading the oldest modern human genomes ever recovered narrowed it down with startling precision. Most of the Neanderthal DNA carried by people alive today traces back to a single, sustained stretch of interbreeding that began around 47,000 years ago and lasted something like 7,000 years. Not a one-night accident lost in the fog of prehistory. A relationship between 2 kinds of human that ran for roughly 200 generations. For decades, this was just a theory, a whisper in the fossil record with no way to prove it. Then came the bone. In 2008, in a cave in the Altai Mountains of southern Siberia, a place called Denisova, named after a hermit who once lived there, researchers pulled out a tiny fragment of a young girl's finger bone. It looked like nothing, but a Swedish scientist named Svante Pääbo had spent years learning to do something everyone said was impossible. To pull readable DNA out of ancient bone, DNA tens of thousands of years old and half destroyed by time. His team sequenced the genetic code inside that fingertip, and what they found stopped them cold. It wasn't Neanderthal, it wasn't modern human, it was a third kind of human being, an entire branch of our family that no one had ever known was there, discovered not from a skull or a skeleton, but from the code inside a single finger. We named them the Denisovans, after the cave. We had found a lost species before we even knew what its face looked like. For this work, and for sequencing the entire Neanderthal genome, Pääbo was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2022. And consider how little they left behind. To this day, nearly everything physical we have of the Denisovans could rest in the palm of your hand. That finger bone, a scattering of teeth, and a single jawbone found later on the Tibetan plateau. No complete skull, no skeleton. We know this entire kind of human, how they lived, where they spread, whom they mixed with, what they gave us, almost entirely from the DNA locked inside a few fragments. An entire branch of humanity, resurrected from genetic code alone. And then the same cave gave up something even stranger. Among the scattered fragments was a bone belonging to a girl in her teens. When they read her DNA, they found a mother and a father from 2 different kinds of human. Her mother was a Neanderthal. Her father was a Denisovan. She was a first-generation hybrid, the direct child of 2 separate human species, sitting in the ground for 90,000 years, waiting to be found. It was as close as anyone has ever come to catching our tangled family tree in the very act of tangling. These groups didn't just cross paths. They crossed lines we didn't think could be crossed. The Denisovans left one last puzzle, and it's a strange one. That finger bone came from Siberia, but the living people who carry the most Denisovan DNA are found thousands of miles away out in the Pacific. In parts of Melanesia and New Guinea, people carry as much as 4 to 6% Denisovan ancestry, far more than the faint traces found anywhere else. Which means these vanished humans once ranged across an enormous sweep of Asia, meeting our ancestors again and again, in places we've only just begun to map. A whole lost world of humans hiding in plain sight, inside living genomes. Now, here's where it stops being a story about old bones and starts being a story about you. Because the DNA those vanished humans left in us didn't just sit there quietly, a harmless souvenir. It does things. Right now, in living bodies. And some of what it does is extraordinary. Go to the Tibetan Plateau, nearly 4,000 meters up, where the air holds so little oxygen that most visitors get sick, and where a lowlander's body responds by thickening the blood, which over time can be dangerous, even deadly. Tibetans don't do this. They live, work, and raise children up there, generation after generation, without the blood thickening that punishes everyone else. For years, scientists couldn't explain it. Then they traced it to a single gene, a version of a gene called EPAS1 that controls how the body responds to low oxygen. And when they asked where that version came from, the answer was impossible to ignore. It came from the Denisovans. It turns out those extinct humans had lived high on that same plateau at least 160,000 years ago. A jawbone found in a Tibetan cave proves it. And up there, over unimaginable spans of time, they adapted to the thin air. When modern humans arrived and had children with them, that adaptation was passed down like an heirloom, a survival trait engineered by an extinct species, keeping people alive today. And here's the detail that gives you chills. This exact version of the gene has been found in almost no one else on the entire planet. It is, very nearly, Tibet's alone. The gifts weren't all kind. Much of what our extinct cousins handed down lives in the immune system, the body's oldest battlefield, where genes that once helped fight ancient diseases still fire today. And a few years ago, in the middle of a modern pandemic, this became suddenly uncomfortably real. Researchers found that a long stretch of DNA on one of our chromosomes, a stretch inherited directly from Neanderthals, significantly raised a person's risk of becoming severely ill from COVID-19. That single Neanderthal segment is carried by roughly half of all people in South Asia and about 1 in 6 people in Europe. Think about what that means. A choice made by 2 individuals more than 40,000 years ago helped decide who got dangerously sick in a disease that didn't exist until 2019. And it runs the other way too. A separate piece of Neanderthal DNA actually protects against severe illness. These aren't rare quirks. Neanderthal genes shape skin, hair, metabolism, and immune response across millions of living people in dozens of measurable ways. Now, it would be easy to hear all this and start ranking people, to imagine that more of this ancient DNA makes someone more primitive, or less of it makes someone more advanced. So let's kill that idea cleanly, because the science does. More archaic DNA doesn't make anyone less evolved, or less human, or better, or worse. It simply records where your ancestors traveled and who they happened to meet along the way. Even people whose recent roots are entirely in Africa carry faint traces of Neanderthal ancestry, carried back into the continent by populations that returned. This isn't a ladder with anyone standing at the top. It's something closer to a braided river, separate streams of humanity that split apart, ran side by side, and quietly flowed back together. Every one of us is downstream of that mixing. For a long time, we told our own origin story as a lonely triumph. One clever species walking out of Africa, outlasting every rival, and ending up alone at the top of the tree. The sole surviving humans, proof of how special we were. The DNA tells a stranger, and frankly a warmer story than that. We didn't only outlast the others. We took them in, we loved them, or something enough like it, and had children with them, and folded their genes into our own so completely that they never fully left. The Neanderthals are extinct. The Denisovans are extinct. There is no living population of either anywhere on Earth. And yet a piece of them boarded the human genome tens of thousands of years ago and never got off. Every person outside Africa is, in a small and literal way, a living museum, the last place two vanished kinds of human still exist. They didn't disappear entirely, they just moved in. So look at your hand again. It was never the hand of just one species. Somewhere in it is the fingerprint of a people who watched Ice Age skies, who are gone from every corner of the planet except this one, the code you carry, and pass on, without ever noticing. We were never the only humans, and the others, it turns out, never entirely left. If it's the deep, true stories that brought you here, the ones that quietly rearrange what you thought you were, then stay close, because the next one is already waiting.